My parents had no personal experience with schizophrenia. I mean, can you imagine having a 20-something-year-old son that just tried to murder somebody and commit suicide? What would you do? Where would you turn? Was there any place to turn? Okay, you comfortable?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Actually, I'm not too comfortable. I'm cold.
You're cold?
Yeah.
You want me to put it around your shoulders?
No, I'll be fine.
Are you a good person?
What?
Are you a good person?
I don't judge people that way.
Do people judge you that way?
I do not know. I never asked them.
Where schizophrenia is diagnosed between age 17 and 24.
It's a tragic story. To be the part of the Galvin family is to be part of a tragedy.
This mutation was present in every person in that family who had schizophrenia.
They might hear voices. They can command them to do things.
Thrown a cat into a bonfire, dismembered a dog in the bathtub.
This family gave us hope that there might be a chance to cure schizophrenia.
He shot her first, and then he shot himself.
Well, it started to fall apart. My brothers were falling ill. They were losing their minds. There was no peace and quiet growing up with 9 brothers and 2 sisters in a very small house. Some of the boys were just a little bit too edgy. They got a little bit too rough beyond just playfulness. And that's when you knew something wasn't right. It just was never talked about, nor did we know what was going on. If you look at the first incident, which was really Donald, it took years before we really started to know something was really wrong.
"10:20 a.m., Donald Kenyon Galvin, 24, was booked for protective custody in connection with an alleged suicide and possible homicide attempt. He mixed acid and cyanide and held his wife and himself in the room. He had little insight and gave little feeling about the seriousness of his actions. Here is records from Pueblo, from the state mental hospital, from July 15th, 1970. That is less than a month after the incident with Jean. And it says, Donald is being released to his father, who lives in Colorado Springs, who plans to set up private psychiatric therapy and continue medications for Donald.
Don came home a mess. So it really became apparent that he had something severely wrong with him.
Donald's just been a complete nutcase for most of my life. He came home from college ill when I was a 10 or 12-year-old boy. Though he spent a good portion of that time in his room reciting the Beatitudes to himself. It's kind of hard to ignore his behavior when you're a child. I didn't know what schizophrenia was at the time. But yeah, From age 11 or so on, I knew that there was a serious problem there.
Donald was difficult to live with. My parents just had such a difficult time managing him and his illness. He would take all the pictures off the walls, or break all the statues in the house, or he'd be burning photographs in the fireplace. There was one time when we came home, I remember going in the front door and the whole house was empty of furniture. Being like, what is going on here? And then it sort of started to dawn on you. It's Donald again. He had removed all the furniture from the living room and kitchen and taken it outside up on the hill. I don't think my parents were very good at managing those situations without hysteria and anger. They would be very angry at him, and that would cause him to be more agitated and more violent.
How are you, Donald?
Just like this.
Are you happy?
Yeah, I'm doing fine.
Do you think people were afraid of you when you were younger?
No, I didn't think then. Not that I know. They might have. I don't know.
There was a lot of bad times for Mom. I don't know how she did it. It was mostly that Donald would just be abusive to her. You never know when he was gonna come out and do something stupid. I hold up a knife to my mother's throat.
I do remember Donald coming after my mother physically a few times, and other brothers would step in, Jim, probably Mark and Joe. I never was personally threatened by him or physically harmed by him, but we were all afraid of him, and we had all witnessed his aggression. And so Jim became my mother's go-to for babysitting the younger kids.
Jim was the brother that would pick us up and take us home from the swimming pool. He would take us skating to the skating rink in the wintertime and things like that.
Jim, he was fun to be around. He was cool. He drove a little red convertible and had a motorcycle and wore a leather jacket. Everyone always called him James Dean. They compared him to that kind of persona, that sort of too cool for school, bad boy.
Jim, he liked to party. He took me out to a place when I was still underage, but my old brother says, you look old enough, you look over 18. I think I met Kathy, who became his wife. One of those nights, they were in a bar and drinking beer. Kathy was a very, very lovely girl. Very nice person. I thought she was the best thing that happened to Jim.
I was, I think, 3 when they got married, but Kathy and Jim were always taking the young children off my parents' hands, which I think they appreciated. I loved being with them. They were great fun. I mean, they were always great fun. But then there's this dark side to him that was horrible.
I don't know if Jim was giving Mom and Dad a break, because we spent a fair amount of time at his home, even on sleepovers. And it seemed like for a lot of years, Jim and Kathy were a pretty happy couple. But I don't know inside that relationship how things were.
I don't know how much the others remember of those times, but Jim was extremely abusive to Kathy. He would come home at night drunk, and he would cause some kind of ruckus with her, and there'd be yelling and screaming. We would just be hearing it. We'd be in the other room. Then sometimes Jim would then leave, you know, he'd go out in a rage, and Kathy would say, okay, come on, kids, let's get in the car, let's go, we need to get out of here. Like for fear of our lives. But it was either be there with that or be at home with Donald, which for some reason was scarier because it involved things that weren't real. Whereas I think Jim's was more concrete. It was like domestic violence may be more socially acceptable, perhaps, than schizophrenia. And so I don't know which was worse.
What is schizophrenia?
Thinking of many different things, and in doing so, you carrying too much that way. It's hard on the person that is schizo.
Why is it hard on the person? What makes it hard on the person?
Not knowing where to stop and rest on things.
Do you hear voices in your head?
When I was away from them, I chose not to be with them because their angels spoke through me and hurt. Although I don't hear voices.
But did you used to hear voices?
Pardon?
Did you used to hear voices?
Yeah, I used to like them well enough.
There are many causes of people arriving at this state of behavior and experience that we call schizophrenia, but there are certain common characteristics. Probably the most dramatic characteristic are what we call hallucinations, which can be very frequent, very disturbing, and dominate the person's life. They hear things, and generally what they hear are voices. Usually multiple voices, often of people they don't know. Rarely are the voices friendly. They're usually voices that negatively comment on their behavior, on their appearance, on their thinking. They can command them to do things that can be very destructive. And they generate tremendous anxiety and discomfort. And this is one of the most really dramatic, harrowing experiences of individuals with schizophrenia.
Don and I didn't get along very well. And Don was physically abusive. Don and Jim were at each other's throats all the time. I tried to avoid the family when it suited me to do so and not be part of the strife that was going on. After I graduated from high school, I didn't visit Colorado Springs very often because I got a scholarship to go to music school. I had piano as my major instrument while I was going to school. And that's where I met my wife after a couple of years at the University of Colorado. Met in 1970.
And married January 9th, 1971. And that was 51 years ago. When I first went to his family, it seemed a little off. It was overly orderly. And Mimi would give instructions and everybody followed it to the letter, like they're little robots. I didn't see individual personalities of interest. And I thought it was strange that each girl had their own little room, and these boys were stacked 2 bunk beds in one room. So you had 4 in one room, 4 in another, and 2 in another. Everything was in order. And everybody had a job. Somebody set the table, somebody washed, somebody dried. Mimi would deliver orders and they would do it. It just seemed like one bad apple spoiled the whole bunch.
Thanksgiving is supposed to be a day to be thankful for a bountiful harvest and whatever you have in your life that is good. My mother had prepared a beautiful meal for everybody.
And it was all prim and proper, setting up the table. Beautiful tables, china and the whole thing. They spared nothing there. But we were one of those families that was to be seen and not heard.
I don't know what sparked the argument between Donald and Jim that day. I was the only sibling in the dining room when they came in. They're chasing each other around the dining room table. And Jim's faster. Donald can't catch him. They're on opposite sides of the table, and Donald just decides to pick the table up and throw it. And then my mother comes in the room, sees the wreck of her dining room, takes the rolling pin, smashes the gingerbread house. And I'm witness to this. I'm like, what the heck is going on?
Trying to get attention. I think that was part of it. They wanted attention. They were losing their minds. They needed help.
I think my parents knew that there was something going on with Jim. It sort of all came crashing down within a matter of, felt like a very short time in my life.
I really didn't know that Jim was schizophrenic while I was growing up. Donald, was the first, obviously, to become ill. And I didn't know about Jim's. I know he had some issues as a young boy being admitted in Denver at Fitzsimmons Hospital. But then he came out and he seemed like he was okay.
I was unaware as a child that he was mentally ill. I had no understanding or indication that he had sought treatment and that my parents had helped him get treatment. And in retrospect, of course, he was quite ill.
God, you couldn't believe what you were hearing that was happening. Jimmy running around naked. Donald on a monk robe. I mean, you're going, what is going on with these brothers of mine? And so I started spending a lot more time with my friends, going out and being with others outside of the house. I'm to partake in the experimental drugs.
Pretty much all of us experimented with recreational drugs. I remember my older brothers giving me marijuana at a very young age. By middle school, it was White Crosses, which was a speed, an upper. And then on through college, mushrooms, acid, cocaine, anything and everything, and usually all at the same time is how I put it.
When I was a kid and my parents would go out of town on a business trip, my older brothers always had a party at the house at Hidden Valley. And there was a lot of drug use.
I saw firsthand my brother smoking pot when we came home from college. I couldn't believe it. Of course, I was involved with athletics. If you were caught smoking or something like that, you were off the team. You were suspended. You didn't play. So I didn't do any of that stuff.
My brothers Brian and Michael, I consider both of those true old school hippies. Michael went to Woodstock. You know, he was definitely truly part of that culture as a young guy.
This is Michael right here. And you can see, like, he's a little kid. He's like, so, like, just, I don't know. He just had a peacefulness about him from a very young age, I think. My parents were frustrated because they wanted him to, you know, find a career and go about the normal things you're supposed to go about in life. He was much too interesting for a traditional career.
He's an interesting guy. My dad, I was a daddy's girl. He was my Peter Pan. Like, my parents separated when I was 3. So he's always been sort of a nomad. Like, it took him a long time to kind of find some settlement in his life, I think. He always has loved his music. That's been where he put his energy in because it was probably his way of escape.
Michael and Mom did not get along well when Michael was younger. He was a rebellious type, you know. Mom always wanted him to cut his hair, things like that. And I don't think my mom understood the hippies at all.
He was counterculture. He epitomized what my parents feared was causing the schizophrenia.
To see whatever he saw as a kid and having to, you know, process through and go through, I can definitely imagine that he would have had to kind of determine, am I normal? Am I okay? Do I have this? Do I don't? If I were him growing up in a household like that, I probably would have been like, wow, you know, is this gonna happen to me?
Michael was in California, and one day, I think he was 17, and he thought, oh, we can't be that far from the beach. I'm gonna go to the beach. And he cut through a neighborhood or a trailer park or something, and I think someone's hose was running, and he took a drink of water from it. And the person called the police and had him arrested for trespassing. He ended up in a maximum security state mental hospital in California at the age of 18 years old for 6 months. Can you imagine? And so here my mom is at home with Donald, who's not well. Jim was not well either. And then this happens. I don't think they knew what to make of it all. My brother Michael was originally, I think, taken to jail and then transferred to the psychiatric hospital. And I think maybe my parents played a hand in that, in saying, oh, he has a brother, this must be happening to him too.
There was some overcrowding, I think, issues, and he had a choice. And I guess he chose to go to a mental institution instead of staying in the jail, which he said to me was a one flew over the cuckoo's nest sort of experience. I think he thought it was going to be easier. I think he thought it was going to be a little bit more laid back or something, but mental institutions at that time in the 70s were not so much. From my understanding, they were a little more scary than probably just being in a jail cell probably would have been.
My parents wanted to have him committed, and Michael was totally blown away. The fact that they really didn't understand him. Because when your brother has it, everybody just looks at you and say, oh, are you next? You know, is that going to happen to you?
I think my parents suspected schizophrenia in Michael, but I don't know if that was because they already had experienced it with some of my other siblings, that they think, why not another one, you know? Certainly with Michael, that would have been a misdiagnosis.
My dad, I think he's always had to sort of present that he's not, you know, ill like his brothers. Because I think back in the 60s and 70s, when a teenager had the long hair and the hippies, they thought something was wrong with them, that it was, you know, outside of that normal, clean-cut boy. And I don't think he's ever been that.
I remember many conversations with my mother on the phone about what was going on. I dealt with it on a, as it comes, take it. You know, you deal with one at a time. I never thought of the overall big picture. I mean, there were some moments that I've heard about with her, with Donald trying to strangle her at one point and kill her. That had to be frightening. It had to be.
Donald Galvin is a 28-year-old divorced male admitted to Colorado State Hospital September 1, 1973 on a confine and treat order from El Paso County. Just prior to admission, he had been in an argument with his mother over medication that he wished to take. She had taken it from him, refused to give it to him, and he reportedly grabbed her by the throat and began to shake her. She became quite frightened, and the other children in the home broke up the struggle. The conflict was often over medication. The conflict was often over my mother having to orchestrate the medicines, to administer the medications, and prevent Donald from overdosing.
Joan's mother would often, every time we go, she says, oh, I have no sharp knives in the house. Well, that speaks volumes. John and I had traveled with this old trailer with an icebox because I didn't want to sleep in the house. John's mother had made up these beds for the kids, and we were invited to go to dinner, and so we left the kids at John's parents' house. It took about, 20 minutes to get there, for this dinner date. And we were greeted at the front door and saying, oh, there's emergency, I got to leave right now. So we got in the car and booked home. And there were several cop cars there with the lights blaring, twirling around, and it was dark. And I rushed up the stairs, and we were stopped by the police. Oh no, you can't go there. And I said, my children. And then they let us in. John's mother had locked herself in their bedroom, and she called the cops.
And that might have been the time that Jim was wandering around with a gun or something.
It was very frightening.
323 to 584.
It doesn't take much imagination to realize what could happen. You don't know if you're going to find dead bodies. Did never stayed in that house again. After that incident, there's no problem with staying somewhere else.
So here you're seeing violence, and it was pretty chronic. It was a pretty chronic thing. But my mother relied on Jim to get the younger children out of the house. I don't think my parents had anywhere else to turn. Jim, of course, was causing tremendous damage as well. But he wasn't the only one.
Who is your favourite brother or sister?
Brian.
Brian was your favourite brother?
Brian, yeah.
Why do you like Brian?
He played the piano real well. And he also played the flute. And he did real well in that. I liked him for it.
Look at this. Here's the rock star, Brian. It was before I was born, but I know that everyone always spoke about his having created this band in high school that went on to play all over the state. Oh, here he is. That's a good one. That's how I remember him. The long hair and the mustache at the piano, playing music.
Brian could listen to a piece of music on the radio, and then he could transpose it to the piano, the guitar, with one listen. He just had that savant-type ability. He was really talented.
My first recollection of Brian is with his high school band, Paxton's Backstreet Carnival. And then in college, during his college years, he played with a pretty famous rock and roll band from time to time. Rock and roll was the counterculture, right?
Mother and father, of course, were part of the establishment. They followed the rules. But the culture at that time, we've got to remember, we were in the 70s. So it was the drugs, sex, and rock and roll, and the hell with our government because of Vietnam War.
It was a different time, and everything was anti-establishment. It was a brave new world.
My parents described Brian as having taken a different path, not the traditional academic, go to college, get a job, that he was reaching for the stars, that he somehow was going to be famous. I think for some reason, my family was convinced that Brian was going to be some famous rock star.
And I was still going to school with Nancy in Boulder. I encouraged Brian to come up there and join me at the music school. And so he did for maybe a semester. And then he decided he wanted to go to California and start a band out there.
He was very much a part of the hippie culture at that time in history. But these two are definitely how I remember him. You know, he had had such tremendous success with his high school band that I think they thought it was just a natural evolution for him to go and become somehow a famous rock star in California.
Brian didn't become a rock star and he didn't become famous.
No, he most certainly did not. I do remember very clearly Brian's girlfriend, Noni, coming. And I remember them being very happy together and they were having fun. And so it was, you know, probably first love, I would imagine.
The only time I met Noni was when to visit with Brian. He was home for California for a trip to visit. And I talked to her for just a brief period of time when she came. She seemed like a very quiet, shy kind of gal. a little bit withdrawn maybe.
Noni was the youngest child out of three. My mother was her stepsister. She was a beautiful girl. Long blonde hair, kind of that California tan look to her, blue eyes, you know. She was definitely a looker. She went to school in Sacramento, and that's when she met Brian. Brian was in a band that they were performing on one of the campuses there.
I've never been any closer to any of my other brothers or sisters as Brian. And then he went to California, seemingly living a good life with his girlfriend. And I could never imagine, ever in my wildest dream, Brian hurting anyone.
One morning, I got a phone call from my father, and he was pretty short and direct about it. And he used exactly these words. He said, your brother's dead. And I was stunned. There wasn't much conversation after that.
Somehow he got into her apartment and was basically laying in wait until she showed up. At the time, I didn't realize the violence of it, of what actually took place. I wasn't told right away. He shot her first, and then he shot himself.
Sheriff's deputies are investigating an apparent murder-suicide involving 19-year-old Laura Lee L. Smith of Lodi, that's Noni, and Brian Galvin, 22, of Sacramento.
Lorelei Smith, 19-year-old daughter of an El Cerrito physician, was apparently murdered by her former boyfriend, who police said then turned a .22 caliber rifle on himself, committing suicide.
Police say there were no signs of a struggle.
It's just hard. It's just hard reading it.
I was shocked. I never could have imagined Brian doing that. But I never knew he was on psychotic drugs for schizophrenia. He was already on prescribed drugs. I knew nothing about it. My parents never told me anything about him medically being treated for schizophrenia.
I blame Brian for his actions, but I can't sit there and say it's all his fault because of his mental illness.
After Brian's death, I think there was a lot more awareness and about what was going on in the family with mental illness. Up until that time, it was kind of taken lightly. And then when Brian committed suicide, I think things in the family changed. It was a lot more somber. I know especially for my parents. Day had turned into night. It was dark. There were frightening moments, definitely. police would come to the house, you know, and have to deal with one of the boys. And my older brother, Jim, I think the disease affected him differently than Don. The violence and the way he treated Kathy, being violent with her. And he was abusive to my sister, Mary, I know.
I think the general overall feeling in the household was that of complete disbelief. How could such tragedy happen? My mom and dad were quite distressed, obviously, as anyone would be, with the death of Brian. And my mother had her hands full with Donald. Being around schizophrenia is very difficult. And so I could either stay at Hidden Valley Road with my schizophrenic brothers, or I could go hang out at my brother Jim's, my perpetrator, my abuser, my rapist.